Well, thank you for tuning in and joining us, everyone. I'm here with Andrea Jacob. Thanks for joining us today. And,
Thank you for having me.
Of course, happy to. Andrea's a strategic partner of ours and an estate planning attorney and practicing for the last 32 years.
Give or take.
Awesome. Well, we're very happy to have you. And
thank you.
We look at you as a huge resource for us and a lot of our clients. Today, we're going to do a quick Q&A and just answer some common questions about estate planning. Maybe answer some misconceptions and really hopefully learn some valuable lessons from someone who's been doing it for a long time. So really the first question is, can you help us describe what estate planning is and then maybe what it's not?
Right. So I love starting with what estate planning is not, because many people think, well, I don't have an estate. So estate planning is not just for those with large manors and estates that you would see on TV. Mm-hmm. It's for everyone during your lifetime. So it's making sure you have the appropriate documents for during your life, and then your family has what they need after your life. So it's not just for when you pass, it's for when you're living. Very importantly.
Absolutely, that's a good point, and that there's value in almost everyone at least addressing it or talking about it or looking at different components of it.
From age 18 on.
Absolutely.
So people say, well, when is it the right time to begin with an estate plan? And the best time is now, right?
Okay.
So my daughter on her 18th birthday, I made her sign some documents, and I'm glad I did.
She had no choice.
She had no choice.
That's great. What would you say are some of the essential components of an estate plan? I'm sure you can spend a 2-hour meeting with an individual going through them all, but for the video's purposes.
Sure. So everyone has heard of a will.
Mm-hmm.
A will, I do think, is mostly a dear judge letter. A will would have to be probated. Mm-hmm. So a probate is a process where you take a will and your wishes and you make sure that the judge has approved of the formalities that were followed in completing the will. So the signatures, the notaries, the witnesses, but also that it is the correct document, and that the right beneficiaries are the ones inheriting. So it's a long, arduous process. Mm-hmm. It's expensive. So the goal is to try to maybe avoid a will and use a trust as your estate planning essential document. Now the will, if you have minor children, that would be for guardianship and for those issues. But the trust, people, it's not just for those with large trust funds. It's for just everyone to make sure that their wishes are A, kept private, because the trust is private, but B, that they can handle things and matters during their lifetime, and then their family, they protect them for after their lives. We're going to get more into that, I'm sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And then I know you've mentioned the importance of having power of attorneys in place and healthcare directives.
Yes. So I believe the most important document that we have during our lifetime is a Florida financial durable power of attorney, if you're in Florida. So a financial durable power of attorney should contain everything from a pre-need guardianship to allowing your family to take care of a broken pipe if you're traveling and you have a disaster in your house. Mm-hmm. So you assign, right, it does happen. So you assign those to take care of your home during your lifetime and under your direction. And then if you lose some capacity, it helps your family navigate through those uncharted waters.
That's a good piggyback into my next question is if you have any good real life examples of when an estate plan first and foremost protected an individual and their family, but maybe also an example of when it wasn't in place and it didn't help an individual or a family.
Right. So, well, quite often an estate, they say about 60% of Americans do not have an estate plan in place. So the examples are every day in the probate arena. So we have, and they're never a fun case to work on because nobody is happy. You've lost someone, and to add insult to injury, you have to then worry about what the wishes were, siblings fighting with each other, and one of our goals is family harmony. Absolutely. So it's protecting our children's inheritance, but also making sure that they get along and they don't fight over silly items, which we see quite often. So one example I have of an estate plan that should have taken place, we had a family that the family was fighting over a family Bible.
Wow.
And if in the estate plan they just said this personal item is going to go to my eldest or a specific child, we would have avoided that. It was really heart-wrenching. And right now I have a probate case of an attorney who was a probate attorney who passed away without an estate plan, and with a daughter with multiple children, and trying to navigate those waters and the burden it puts on your family members to have to shoulder dealing with going to an attorney's office to sign documents and trying to piece together what was intended.
Yeah. It's not always about the numbers and the financial components of that losing a loved one and passing of heirs, but it's also the physical objects that are important and have sentimental value.
Absolutely.
That you sometimes don't think about.
You don't.
Know.
If I may give an example, Robin Williams. Everyone
Okay.
knows or remembers Robin
Of
Williams.
course.
So he had tons of TV and movie memorabilia. Now his estate plan was perfectly in place except for his stuff. And so that was something his family fought over, because his memorabilia was actually worth quite a bit,
So,
both sentimentally and also financially.
certainly.
And so that was something that was fought over that could have been avoided, which, that's sort of, it didn't cover every area. And now we have digital assets. We worry about our pets. We worry about making sure that we have every plan in place that we can currently think of.
Absolutely.
But the world is always changing.
It is. It's always moving.
And so that brings me to my next point on making sure that you have to update your estate plan
Okay.
whenever there's a life event, a new baby, a new marriage, a passing. So that's a very important thing to remember, that an estate plan isn't just a one and done, it's a life plan. It's a plan for during your lifetime. What is always changing in your life is added to that estate plan, and to make sure that it's always up to date.
So it's not as simple as once a year, twice a year, or you'll meet with the client every 5 years. It's as life events change and evolve and happen.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Awesome.
Yeah. It's sort of like you go to a doctor every once in a while for an annual. I like to tell my clients, okay, it's time for your annual checkup. Let's see if there's any change in your life.
Absolutely. What else might be top of mind that listeners should be thinking about?
So one thing we don't think about, and many people just assume that if they're married, their spouse has an automatic right to speak on their behalf. And that's not the case. So I started with a financial durable power of attorney. Years ago, I had a client whose husband had a massive stroke at a young age.
Okay.
And he didn't pass away, but he was unable to communicate. The credit card companies wouldn't speak to her. He had a car lease, the company wouldn't speak to her.
Wow.
And she wasn't able to handle any of the financial matters, because he handled all the financial matters and she had no authority to speak on his behalf. So that's one of the areas that is never really thought of, that you need during an incapacity. So a temporary incapacity, a healthcare emergency. Just because you may be married or a parent of someone, if they're an adult, and you don't have just an automatic right to speak for them.
And that's a great point. A question we had recently from one of our clients was, and this kind of piggybacks off that point, is your adult children go off to college, they're now adults. So if you can explain the value of having that healthcare proxy in place when could be out of state or even a few hours away without someone to help make those decisions for them.
So my daughter is going to kill me, but my example that I use is her freshman year in college. She was already an adult and she fell and she broke her jaw. And luckily, I knew on her 18th birthday that she needed to sign those documents, because I was just imagining what would happen. She was 8 hours away, but I was able to communicate with the nurse at the hospital. And at first she said, well, ma'am, I can't speak to you. And I said, yes, you can. Check your fax machine. And I sent over the necessary documents, and she came back and we were able to get my daughter a CAT scan and start on the process of healing.
That's great.
The next day she could speak again. And they said, sorry, she's speaking for herself. So it's only for a time where you cannot communicate.
Of course. And that's helpful in that moment to have that.
Imperative.
Absolutely.
So one thing that I didn't mention was as our children begin to become adults themselves, between ages 25 and 40, forgive me, that's a time where many young adults will have divorces or will get into scrapes or have a lawsuit against them. So we want to protect our children from losing those funds that we've saved for them for an inheritance.
Absolutely.
And so by using a trust as the document that will control how your children will receive money at the right time when it's right for them, that is a blessing.
Okay.
Because you're able to protect your family from the unknown.
Certainly.
And also a trust will enable you to make sure that if, God forbid, you lose a child, their children will inherit and will go to a spouse. And so everything stays within your family. And many of my clients, their biggest concern is, well, I want to make sure everything stays with my children. And that is the first thing that I promise that we will make sure.
And there's really no other option out there to direct those wishes after passing, right? It is trust work.
It's trust work.
There's no alternative structure in place, from what I understand.
Yes, because if you name a child as a beneficiary to an account, they're going to receive that money immediately upon your passing. And that's a dump into their bank account that can be taken by a bad actor.
Absolutely.
By a financial predator or by a lawsuit or an ex-spouse or soon-to-be ex-spouse. I actually had one client whose son inherited $500,000 from grandparents.
Wow.
Blew it in a year. So
sadly a common story, right?
And actually, we just had this conversation just the other day. So it's amazing that a young adult who receives an inheritance, and you hope that they're going to be wise, but we can't predict how our children will react when we've passed.
Of course.
And so they're at a time where they're the most vulnerable, and that's when they're most likely to make some rash decisions, and we protect against that.
That's great. That's great. And in that trust language, I assume you can stipulate sometimes how those assets are distributed until a certain age or amounts, or whether it's distributions and income. I mean, I'm sure it can get as complicated or as simple as me did.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
You know, I don't think anyone under the age of 25 should really receive an outright inheritance.
I agree. Yeah.
You're still in school, you're still getting your graduate degrees, you're still in the process of learning what it's like to be an adult, and to receive an inheritance at that age or below is quite risky for the funds. So I normally say, well, anyone under this age, we'll discuss with our clients whether they would like their children to be able to use funds to travel abroad. Does that look like traveling abroad for a semester or going to a spring break travel?
So you can get very specific.
Very specific. And we talk about what your goals are, and everyone is an individual. So it really should match the individual's wants. And if I can tell anyone who's watching, one of the biggest problems that we see in our probate cases are estate plans that were prepared using online legal forms.
I would love for you to touch on that, because we've seen a lot of it. Obviously, in the modern day, you've got access to new technologies and new services, and what comes with different pricing and level of service. And obviously, we all know the more personalized you get, especially with family and money, and it breeds a better outcome and your wishes to be followed. So if you can share some of your experience with those services, that'd be great.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So we had a woman recently whose husband wanted to save money, and so he used I'm not going to say the name of the company, but one of the online resources that has attorneys available if you need them, which it's not a Florida attorney, it's not a state specific website. And it was done so completely wrong that it affected her taxes.
Oh, geez.
So there are reasons why you need to speak to an attorney, because there are ways to avoid having an outcome where you don't want your family to have to pay capital gains taxes if unnecessary. So
Certainly.
we want to protect them from all of those mistakes that can be made by.
And that's why they're coming to you, right? And that the expertise, the professionalism, and the hands-on approach of the entire picture.
And it's a hands-on approach.
Yeah.
Tomorrow morning I have a 9 a.m. client it's a husband and wife, and she is at the end stages of a very horrific illness, and so this is sort of an emergency appointment, and the whole family is involved with making sure that we have everything in place. So there's still a minor child involved and a lot of issues.
So it's not as simple as a template, sign and date. Okay.
It's not.
Yeah.
So, but it's always important. And if anyone has any questions, my website does have a great deal of resource. I have lots of blog posts going back years
What's
and years.
What's that website?
It's Jacob Legal. That's Jacob with a K, JAKOBLEGAL.com.
Perfect. Well, I really appreciate you joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Of course, it's our pleasure and honor to have you. We appreciate you tuning in and listening. We're going to keep these Meet the Professional videos rolling just so we can educate ourselves and our listeners. And thanks for the support.
Thank you.